So today I'm really, really excited because technology, social media, and how adults and children are consuming information is probably the biggest topic in households. And one of the biggest topics within that conversation is TikTok. You've probably seen your kids trying to make up a dance and be creative and then share that information. And then when you go through your Instagram feed, you can actually see celebrities doing the same thing, couples doing the same thing. And TikTok is like this natural feeling where you feel like you connect with somebody and see somebody in their unartificial environment, trying to be very real with you. So it's a very powerful dynamic to have coming into our lives. The issue for many people is how much information do we really know about the apps that we bring into our everyday lives? And I think it's important for us to understand that when we engage in the social media world, it is our responsibility to have information. So that's what fascinated me. If my children are using apps and they are somehow growing in conversation or in personality because of it, I want to know what goes into these apps, who's behind these apps, and what is the intent to begin with to even create it. So my next guest is Shauna Ghosh. She is the UK tech editor for Business Insider. Hello, Shauna. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
Great. Joining us from London. So let's dig in real quick and get to the heart of the matter. How do you define TikTok?
I think of TikTok as being a viral short form video app that's really fun, really unstructured, inspires spontaneity in its users. It works very much like something like Instagram or Snapchat in that it's mostly oriented around you taking video rather than pictures, let's say, uploading it to the platform and sharing it instantly, and often going viral, even if you're not an influencer, even if you're just an everyday person. If you do something sort of funny or talented, then your content can get very popular very quickly. So I think of it as a fairly fun, light-hearted platform, at least superficially.
So Shauna, it's interesting. You're kind of an expert in this field, so I think you're very careful with your words. You know what your words mean. So when you say it's fun superficially, tell me what that means.
So the origins of TikTok are slightly complicated, which most people downloading the app wouldn't necessarily know. It's actually owned by a Chinese company called ByteDance, and sort of the current version of TikTok that people are downloading now outside of China is a sort of mishmash of the app that was originally produced by this Chinese company and a different company called Musical.ly, which again, some of your viewers or listeners may have heard of. And ByteDance back in 2017 bought Musical.ly and sort of mashed it into its own app. And that's basically TikTok as we know it today. That unfortunately, when two companies merge, there are often big issues that sort of come about. And in this instance, it was that Musical.ly, it was a startup, it was very rough and ready. Maybe they didn't take originally as much care about privacy, user privacy, and especially checking the age of their users as carefully as they should have done. And that's now brought on this whole host of issues for TikTok. Other issues are that generally there is a sense that the way Chinese internet companies operate is quite different to the standards of privacy, for example, that we expect in the West. We expect that our data isn't just going to be sort of drained willy-nilly without our permission and then used elsewhere for advertising or other purposes that we don't really know about. We expect that it will be stored in our own country or in a country where the government is a democratic one and isn't necessarily going to ask for our data and come and spy on us, anything like that. But with China, again, the laws are quite different around freedom of information, freedom of speech, privacy, etc. And so there's much less clarity if a Chinese company is operating an app or owns an app as to where the information it's gathering is going and how safe that information is. I should say there are questions around that with TikTok, but no proof that what it does is unsafe. There's just lots of worry about it.
What is the privacy threshold in common terms would you use that you would feel comfortable with?
Yeah, it's a good question. So the fact that many tech companies, and I would include US ones here, are not particularly regulated. They're private companies. They're not seen as similar to sort of public platforms. And so essentially these companies get to decide for themselves what is appropriate and what isn't, which has posed many interesting challenges, I would say, over the years. And I think Facebook is a very good example where there are many ongoing questions over, what is appropriate to appear on Facebook. We are aware of big, high-profile incidents where terrorist content has been widely shared on Facebook and has potentially inspired copycats. But again, we don't really know. It's very difficult to draw that through line. But clearly, Facebook isn't automatically blocking this stuff off the bat because it can't. So actually, there sort of isn't really a standard except for what we as a society agree is not acceptable. And so you get a lot of campaigners who say there should be laws around this stuff. And I would probably agree. And the tech companies outwardly say they agree to, and then quietly lobby against any changes in the law. But the fact that there isn't consistency here is one of the biggest problems in this area, that, TikTok may deem something inappropriate, but Facebook says something completely different. And, we're talking about parents here, particularly, or users who are not necessarily super into, reading privacy policies on every app. Why would you be? So this lack of consistency is incredibly confusing. You might see that something is very well regulated on, I don't know, YouTube. Mostly stuff isn't very well regulated on YouTube, but take that as an example. And then, TikTok's policies say something totally different. That's very confusing as a parent or as a user, that something seems to be acceptable on one platform, but then pops up on another platform. Reddit is another example as to, there seem to be very different boundaries as to what's appropriate and what's inappropriate. So that lack of consistency around the board is, I think, very concerning, not just for parents, but for anyone looking out for vulnerable users.
Which brings us to a very interesting conversation for parents and a child and TikTok, where TikTok, being entertaining and fun, can also have an impact on mental health, can also have an impact on self-esteem, can also have an impact on addiction to technology. What are your thoughts on that, Shona?
It's a difficult one. So as someone who, when I was about 16, I was very heavily online. I did a lot of online gaming. I think my parents didn't entirely understand what I was up to, so didn't really take checks. They just saw that I was diligently on my computer and they thought I was doing homework. Who knows? But, as far as they could tell, I wasn't getting into trouble. But actually, at that period, sort of early 2000s, late 90s, it was more of a Wild West than it is now. And so, kind of when I think about these issues, I think of myself at that time and what I would have wanted. And in some ways, having that unfiltered access to these spaces meant in a lot of creativity. It taught me about how to navigate potentially quite dangerous online spaces because, luckily nothing happened to me, but you do meet some very odd characters if you're doing anything on an online social network or game. And so it taught me those kind of boundaries. Obviously, other children, may not have had the same sort of awareness, may not have had the same sort of support in their parents or school to be able to explore in this way. But generally, I think it's important to remember that the internet is a huge learning opportunity for kids. It gives them a place to sort of roam around and explore their own interests. But of course, you have to balance that with keeping them safe. And it's difficult because often younger users tend to be a bit savvier about this stuff than their parents are. It's very difficult to really put internet controls on what your kids are up to because the chances are they probably know how to work around them. So I think the key thing is a mix of these companies, banding together and doing a bit more to protect their users in a more collaborative way, perhaps lawmakers getting involved too. But, parents ensuring that their children are very well informed about risks and are able to, are empowered to take decisions for themselves. And that was certainly my experience, as I felt like I had the information at my disposal to decide, this person feels dodgy or this space feels dodgy. I don't feel safe. Actually, I'm going to stop doing this. And it was my decision. It wasn't someone trying to lock me out of a space, which, of course, to particularly teenagers is a way of making a space more appealing. If you sort of lock them out of a space rather than educating them as to why certain behaviors or spaces may not be so desirable. So, generally, I think that education tends to be the way forward. Again, it's not possible for every type of user, those who are more vulnerable, but to me, that's probably the best way of protecting younger users. These companies do have huge power and billions of users quite frequently, sort of 2 billion in the case of both Facebook and TikTok. And there's actually not very much that the individual can really do. These companies are quite faceless. You submit a complaint and nothing happens. And, this is where the role of the media has been quite important, is that individuals have gone to the media and said, I have these concerns, or I've seen this inappropriate content. I can't get Facebook or TikTok or whoever to do anything about it. Can you perhaps get them to do something about it? And surprisingly, or perhaps unsurprisingly, these companies are very reactive to bad PR. So, if you really see something inappropriate on TikTok or any other platform, consider speaking to your local journalist or a journalist at a US or a foreign publication, because chances are we may be able to get this content removed, because these companies are very reactive to journalists, but perhaps not to individuals. So again, I think it is a wider problem that individuals don't have a lot of recourse against these very large and frankly unregulated companies.
So that's powerful. I think it's powerful to see, the two tracks that a person can take. Actually, the three tracks that you stated. You stated one, that parents can have a hold on a role in education. Number two, you can talk to your legislators and you can advocate. But before you do that, you have to be well read. Everybody has a computer, so get online, learn about the lawsuit. Google lawsuit against TikTok, and let's see what comes up. And third is journalists, right? So there's three arms that are there that can actually have some kind of resistance to these problematic, dangerous situations that can happen with technology. And I think that when we see like this huge mothership, right, that's how I see it, like a huge mothership alliance of social media companies, and we use them to our benefit, and we learn so much from them. And they're so useful. We always have to be mindful that we have to know our comfort level. And when that discomfort happens, we have to use these three arms to reach out and say, you know what, this is great, but this could be better, right? Like something needs to be tweaked here and there. And we all have a role as a society to do that. So, Shauna, you have been surrounded by technology. It seems to me that as a young child, you were passionate about it, you found your footing, this was your environment, right? And now professionally, you have given your skills and your intellect to it. When you see all of these issues, which you have stated, unfortunately, in your terms, you say not a lot of this is regulated. You've seen very much through your news scrolls about death threats, bullying, and everything that happens. How do you, and what do you use for yourself to continue to be in this space without getting jaded, and be optimistic and be pro technology and pro apps? What do you do to move forward in the world of technology?
I try and stay educated, and I think that's something everyone can do. Obviously, we're all very pressed for time, and it's difficult to often keep on top of all the apps and services and technologies at our disposal. But ultimately, that's the best weapon that any of us can have to sort of stay on top of what's happening, campaign or write about issues, or just be aware of, perhaps what your child is up to, or what are the tools that are available to you, and how things can change. I think staying informed and up to date on these apps, reading the news coverage around them, and just reading around the issues, I think is always the best way to stay on top of things. So I always try and be on the front foot, and not everyone needs to be following every little news development, but I think staying educated, I think is the key way that we're going to be able to use technology to our advantage as opposed to our disadvantage.
Well, I thank you, Shauna, because you are vital in keeping us educated. So I'm so glad that you do that. It's a service. It's going to be a necessity more than ever now. And we have a younger generation that is going to be relying on experts like you to guide them. So I thank you so much for having this conversation with me, for making me ultimately smarter, and keeping me very alert on what comes through the eyes and the minds of my children. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Shauna has taught me so much in this conversation. She has taught me, number one, that technology is something that we are never going to get away from, that technology is the overpowering realm that our children are going to be using, that it's a necessity, and also that as citizens and as parents, we have a responsibility to really do our investigation, to really do our research, and read about what kind of apps our children are using. One major thing she stated is that parents need to educate their kids. They need to be very aware that children are going into uncharted territory, so it starts in the home. She also introduced the idea of talking to your legislators to talk about how we can regulate this type of content. And she also talked about journalists being an ally for this. So if you see things coming into this app that are dangerous, if TikTok is something that you use all the time, but you're concerned about privacy issues, you're concerned about what kind of things are being said, if you're concerned about pedophiles, don't sit back and just say, oh my God, this is scary. There are actually avenues. There are experts out there that are studying this issue, that are advocating for this issue, and become an ally and become an agent. So when you are seeing your children using these apps, you don't feel that you are on the receiving end of your circumstances, but you're actually proactive. So I got so much smarter today on TikTok, and I got so much smarter on technology in general, which is exciting to me. I hope it was exciting to you. And as always, today I bid you peace.